She just took over her sick black sister's job in his kitchen, unaware the angry cowboy will fall for her. The trembling girl clutches a worn satchel as the supply wagon disappears into Montana dust, leaving her alone at the ranch gates. The ranch hands smirk and whisper that kitchen girls like her never last a month under the giant cowboy's harsh tongue. They assume she'll be gone before winter, another failure cast back to whatever desperate place she crawled from. But the towering ranch owner, hardened by years of loss and isolation, doesn't realize this quiet newcomer carries secrets that could transform both their lives forever. Hidden in her sister's belongings lies a truth that will either unite two wounded souls or destroy them when the deception is finally revealed. Will she survive his fury when he discovers what she's been hiding? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. Emma Thompson stepped off the supply wagon with nothing but a worn leather satchel and a crumpled letter from her dying sister. The Montana dust swirled around her ankles as the driver disappeared down the rutted road without a backward glance. Carter Ranch stretched before her like a small kingdom of wooden buildings and endless pasture. Cattle dotted the horizon under the blazing sun. The main house loomed 3 stories high with wraparound porches that had seen better years. A lean man with calculating eyes approached from the barn. Tom Becker, the ranch foreman, looked her up and down with obvious displeasure. "You the replacement for Sarah?" "Yes, sir. I'm Emma, her sister." Tom spat into the dirt. "Kitchen's that way. Don't expect special treatment because you're kin to her." He turned and walked away before she could respond. Emma found the kitchen bustling with pre-dinner preparations. Steam rose from enormous pots while the smell of bread filled the air. A sturdy woman with graying hair looked up from chopping vegetables. "You must be Emma. I'm Daisy Renard, head cook." Her voice carried warmth that Tom's had lacked. "Sarah spoke of you often. How is she?" Daisy's expression softened. "Resting at the boarding house in town. The consumption has her weak, but she's comfortable." 2 younger women worked at the far counter, stealing glances at Emma while whispering. Their looks held no welcome. "Don't mind them," Daisy said quietly. "They've seen plenty of girls come and go. Most don't last a month." "Why not?" "Mr. Carter expects perfection. He's not cruel, mind you, but he's got no patience for mistakes." Daisy handed Emma a clean apron. "Keep your head down, work hard, and you'll do fine." Emma tied the apron strings with trembling fingers. She needed this position desperately. Sarah's medical bills had drained their meager savings, and winter was coming fast. Daisy showed her the pantry, the wash basins, and the massive iron stove that dominated one wall. "Breakfast is at dawn. Sharp. Mr. Carter takes his coffee black, eggs over easy, bacon crisp. No exceptions. Has he always been so particular?" "Since his wife passed 5 years back. Lost her and the baby both." Daisy's voice dropped. "Turned him hard as winter stone." The kitchen door swung open. Heavy boots crossed the wooden floor with measured steps. James Carter filled the doorway like a mountain given human form. His broad shoulders strained against his work shirt, and his weathered hands could probably snap a man's neck without effort. Dark hair showed streaks of early gray, and his jaw looked carved from granite. His pale blue eyes swept the kitchen before settling on Emma. She felt pinned like a butterfly under glass. "This the new girl?" "Yes, sir," Daisy answered. "Emma Thompson." He studied Emma for a long moment. She forced herself to meet his gaze despite her racing heart. "I expect my breakfast at 6, not 5:59, not 6:01, 6. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Understood?" "Yes, sir." He nodded once and left without another word. Emma released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You did well," Daisy said. "Most girls start crying when he looks at them like that." That evening, Emma explored Sarah's small room above the kitchen. Her sister had left behind a few dresses, some books, and a wooden jewelry box that seemed oddly fine for a kitchen worker's wages. Inside, Emma found pearl earrings and a gold locket that looked expensive. Strange. Sarah had never mentioned owning such things. Emma tucked the jewelry away and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would bring her first real test. Dawn came gray and cold. Emma arrived in the kitchen to find Daisy already stoking the fire. Sleep well? Well enough. Emma had actually lain awake most of the night, rehearsing every step of preparing James Carter's breakfast. She worked carefully, checking the clock every few minutes. Eggs cracked clean into the hot pan. Bacon sizzled to perfect crispness. Coffee brewed dark and strong. At exactly 6 o'clock, she carried the loaded tray to the dining room. James sat at the head of a long wooden table, reading what looked like shipping documents. He didn't look up when she entered. Emma set down his coffee cup first, then his plate. Her hand stayed steady until she reached for the cream pitcher. The ceramic slipped from her nervous fingers. Cream splashed across the papers in a white wave. The documents turned soggy and illegible. James shot to his feet. His chair scraped against the floor like a gunshot. Those were cattle shipping contracts worth $3,000. Emma grabbed her napkin, frantically dabbing at the mess. "I'm so sorry. Maybe if we let them dry, get away from them." His voice cut like a blade. "I don't have time to train clumsy help who can't hold a pitcher steady." Heat flooded Emma's cheeks. "Please, Mr. Carter, it was an accident. It won't happen again." "You're right. It won't." He gathered the ruined papers with careful control. Emma could see the effort it took him not to explode completely. "I'll rewrite them from memory," she offered. "I have good penmanship." James looked at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. "Get back to the kitchen." Emma fled. Behind her, she heard Tom Becker's voice in the hallway. "Told you she wouldn't last. Her kind never does." In the kitchen, Daisy patted Emma's shoulder while she fought back tears. "It's not over yet, child. He's had worse disasters than spilled cream." But Emma had seen the cold dismissal in James Carter's eyes. She was already marked for failure. That afternoon, mail arrived from Denver. Among the letters was one addressed to Sarah Thompson in careful legal script. Emma stared at the return address. Why would a Denver law office write to her sister? Emma waited until after dinner service to open the letter. Her hands shook as she broke the wax seal in the privacy of Sarah's small room. The legal letterhead read, "Morrison, Walsh and Associates, Attorneys at Law." The formal language made her read each sentence twice to understand its meaning. Her father was dead. Charles Whitmore, a prominent Denver businessman, had passed 3 months ago. The will named Sarah and Emma Thompson as his daughters, entitled to equal shares of his estate. Emma's portion included $3,000 in cash and a small property on the outskirts of Denver, the equivalent of what most ranch hands earned in 10 years. She set the letter down with trembling hands. Charles Whitmore had been their father, the white man who visited their mother occasionally when Emma was small, always bringing gifts and speaking in hushed tones about providing for his girls. Emma had assumed he'd forgotten them after their mother died. Apparently, he'd been watching from a distance all along. She opened Sarah's jewelry box again, seeing the expensive pieces with new understanding. Sarah had known about their inheritance. The pearl earrings and gold locket weren't wages from kitchen work. They were gifts from a father trying to care for daughters he couldn't publicly acknowledge. Emma's mind raced. She could leave tomorrow, buy a train ticket to Denver and claim her inheritance. Live comfortably in her own house. Never scrub another pot or endure another humiliating breakfast service. But something held her back. She thought of James Carter's granite expression when the cream spilled, the way his jaw tightened when he was angry, the careful control he maintained over himself even in fury. Tom Becker expected her to fail. The kitchen girls whispered that she wouldn't last a week. Even Daisy, kind as she was, probably doubted Emma would survive James's exacting standards. Emma folded the letter carefully and placed it in the bottom of her satchel. She would stay, not because she needed the money anymore, but because she refused to prove them right. She would show James, Carter, and everyone else that she belonged here. The next morning, Emma entered the kitchen with her shoulders straight and her chin raised. Daisy noticed the change immediately. "You look different today." "I feel different." Emma prepared James's breakfast with steady hands. No trembling, no nervous glances at the clock. When she carried his tray to the dining room, She met his eyes directly. James looked up from fresh shipping papers. "No cream today?" "On the side, sir, in case you prefer it separate." He studied her face for a long moment, as if trying to solve a puzzle. Emma didn't look away. Smart thinking. It was the closest thing to praise she'd heard from him. Over the following days, Emma transformed her approach to everything. She studied the kitchen's inefficiencies and quietly implemented improvements. Food waste decreased. Meal preparation became smoother. She reorganized the pantry and established better systems for inventory. When Daisy questioned where she'd learned such organizational skills, Emma spoke truthfully for the first time in days. "My mother worked for a businessman when I was young. I watched how he ran his household." She simply didn't mention that the businessman had been her father. Emma began making small purchases during her trips to town to visit Sarah. Better cuts of meat from the butcher, higher quality flour from the general store. She paid with coins from her inheritance, claiming she'd negotiated better prices with various suppliers. The improvements were subtle but noticeable. James's meals became more refined. Visiting ranch owners commented on the excellent food. Even Tom Becker grudgingly admitted the kitchen ran more efficiently. James started lingering after breakfast, ostensibly to discuss the day's plans with Daisy, but often glancing at Emma while she worked. She felt his attention like warmth from the stove. "You're different from most girls who work here," he said one morning after finishing his coffee. "How so?" "You don't act afraid of everything." Emma smiled. "Should I be?" "Most people think so." She continued washing dishes, aware of his eyes on her back. "Fear doesn't accomplish much." "No, it doesn't." When he left, Emma realized her heart was racing for entirely different reasons than before. Colonel Morrison arrived the following week with his usual bluster and demands. Emma served his dinner flawlessly, anticipating his needs before he voiced them. The bread was warm, the wine perfectly chilled, the beef cooked to exactly the temperature he preferred. "Carter, where did you find this one?" Morrison asked after his second helping. "Best meal I've had outside Denver." James glanced at Emma, something unreadable in his expression. She came recommended. After Morrison retired to his room, James found Emma cleaning up the kitchen alone. "Good work tonight." "Thank you." He moved closer, studying her face in the lamplight. "You're full of surprises." Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I just try to do my job well." "It's more than that." His voice dropped lower. "You carry yourself like someone who knows her own worth." If only he knew how true that statement was. Emma possessed more wealth in her satchel than most people in the territory would see in a lifetime. But standing here with James, she felt valuable for entirely different reasons. "Everyone deserves to know their worth," she said quietly. Something shifted in his eyes. For a moment, the granite facade cracked, revealing something warmer underneath. Then Tom Becker's voice called from the yard, breaking the spell. "Boss, we've got problems with the north fence." James stepped back, the moment lost. "We'll continue this later." But Emma wondered if they ever would, and increasingly, she hoped they might. Emma's transformation of the kitchen operations accelerated over the next 2 weeks. She implemented a rotating schedule that eliminated food waste and streamlined meal preparation. The other kitchen workers initially resisted her changes, but quickly recognized the improvements. Her secret weapon was the inheritance money. Emma made careful purchases during her weekly visits to Sarah, buying premium ingredients that elevated every meal. She told Daisy she'd negotiated better deals with suppliers, a half-truth that satisfied the head cook's curiosity. The quality difference was unmistakable. Beef became more tender. Vegetables arrived fresher. Even the coffee improved when Emma sourced better beans from a Denver merchant. James began spending more time in the kitchen area. He claimed to be discussing ranch business with Daisy, but Emma felt his attention like a physical presence. His pale blue eyes followed her movements as she worked. During a particularly busy morning, Emma noticed James struggling with inventory ledgers at the kitchen table. Numbers were scattered across multiple pages in no apparent order, ranch expenses mixed with cattle counts and supply lists. "May I?" she asked, approaching cautiously. James looked up with surprise. You understand bookkeeping? Emma's father had taught her accounting principles when she was 12, hoping his daughters would manage their own finances someday. She'd helped balance his household books for years. A little. James handed her the ledgers. Emma studied the chaotic entries for several minutes, then began reorganizing them into logical categories. Income in one column, expenses in another, with subcategories for different ranch operations. Within an hour, she'd created a clear financial picture. James watched her work with growing amazement. Where did you learn this? The businessman my mother worked for taught me numbers. Another careful half-truth. James studied the organized ledgers. This is better than anything my accountant in town produces. Emma felt pride warm her chest. Numbers tell stories if you arrange them properly. From that day forward, James brought his paperwork to the kitchen table every morning. Emma helped organize his records while preparing breakfast, their heads bent close over columns of figures. Their working relationship deepened into something more intimate. James began sharing ranch decisions with her, asking her opinion on cattle purchases and supply contracts. Emma's business instincts, honed by watching her father's operations, proved valuable. One afternoon, while James branded cattle in the north pasture, a heated iron slipped from his grip. The metal seared across the back of his hand, leaving an angry red burn. Emma heard his sharp intake of breath from the fence where she'd been bringing water to the workers. She rushed over as James plunged his hand into the water trough. Let me see. James pulled his hand from the water. The burn stretched from his knuckles to his wrist, already blistering. Emma guided him toward the house. We need to treat this properly. In the kitchen, she cleaned the wound with gentle efficiency. Her touch was soft but sure as she applied salve and wrapped his hand in clean cloth. You've done this before, James observed. I cared for my mother during her illness. Emma's fingers brushed his wrist as she secured the bandage. She taught me basic medical care. James watched her face intently. You're full of surprises. Their eyes met across the small space between them. Emma felt the air thicken with unspoken tension. James's free hand rose toward her cheek. The kitchen door banged open. Tom Becker stomped inside, his face flushed with anger. Boss, we need to talk about the new supplies. James dropped his hand. The moment shattered like glass. What supplies? Tom's eyes narrowed as he noticed Emma's proximity to James. The fancy ingredients she's been ordering. Costs are up 30% this month. Emma's stomach clenched. She'd been careful to pay for upgrades herself, but some items had gone through the ranch accounts by mistake. I can explain, she began. I'm sure you can. Tom's voice dripped suspicion. Funny how a kitchen girl knows exactly what expensive items to order. James looked between them with confusion. What's the problem, Tom? Maybe you should ask her where she's getting the money for these improvements. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. Tom was getting too close to the truth. I negotiated better prices with several suppliers, she said carefully. Tom snorted. Is that what you call it? James's expression hardened. Are you accusing Emma of something specific? I'm saying things don't add up. Good kitchen help doesn't just fall from the sky knowing bookkeeping and medical care and business negotiations. Emma felt trapped. Tom's suspicions were valid, even if his motivations were wrong. I had a good teacher, she said simply. James studied her face. Emma saw doubt creep into his eyes for the first time since her transformation began. We'll discuss this later, he told Tom. After Tom left, James remained silent for a long moment. Is there something you're not telling me? Emma met his gaze steadily. Everyone has a past. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give right now. James flexed his bandaged hand. I trusted you with my books, my business decisions, and I haven't betrayed that trust. Haven't you? The question hung in the air like smoke. Emma realized she was standing at a crossroads. She could confess everything and risk losing James's respect, or continue the deception and risk losing his trust. She chose silence. James nodded slowly. I see. He left the kitchen without another word. Emma stared at his abandoned paperwork on the table, knowing something precious had shifted between them. Tom Becker had planted seeds of doubt that would only grow stronger. Emma's secret was becoming harder to protect, but the truth might destroy everything she'd built. She thought of the inheritance letter hidden in her room and wondered if some secrets were too dangerous to keep. The drought arrived like a curse from an angry sky. Day after day brought nothing but blazing sun and cloudless horizons. The grass turned brown, then brittle, then disappeared entirely. Water levels in the wells dropped steadily lower. Emma watched James transform under the pressure. His jaw tightened permanently. Dark circles appeared under his eyes from sleepless nights spent calculating losses. He stopped lingering in the kitchen, stopped asking her opinion on ranch business. The distance between them felt wider than the Montana plains. Emma still helped with his bookkeeping, but now their interactions were purely professional. James would nod his thanks and leave without meeting her eyes. Tom's accusations had poisoned something precious. During her weekly visit to town, Emma found Sarah weaker than ever. Her sister's cough brought up flecks of blood that stained the white handkerchief she pressed to her lips. "You look troubled," Sarah whispered from her narrow bed. Emma smoothed the blanket over Sarah's frail body. "The ranch is struggling. No rain for 6 weeks." "That's not what's troubling you." Sarah had always been able to read Emma's heart. Even dying, her intuition remained sharp. Emma told her about James's growing coldness, about Tom's suspicions, about the secret that stood between her and any chance of real connection. Sarah listened without judgment. When Emma finished, her sister reached for the wooden box on her bedside table. "I have something for you." Inside the box lay a leather-bound diary, its pages filled with Sarah's careful handwriting. "My journal from the past year. Read it when you're ready." Emma tucked the diary into her bag. "Why now?" Sarah's eyes held secrets Emma couldn't decipher. "Because some truths are too important to die with me." Back at the ranch, Emma overheard James talking with Colonel Morrison in the main parlor. She'd come to deliver afternoon coffee, but stopped outside the door when she heard her name. "The kitchen girl is temporary help," James was saying. "I can't afford to keep extra staff much longer." "Shame to lose her. Best cook you've had in years." "Business is business. If this drought continues, I'll have to let half the crew go." Emma set the coffee tray on the hall table with shaking hands. She'd known the ranch was struggling, but hearing James dismiss her so casually felt like a physical blow. She retreated to Sarah's room and opened the diary. The early entries were mundane. Sarah described ranch life, the kitchen routine, her growing illness. But as Emma read further, the content shifted dramatically. Sarah had researched James Carter before taking the job. She'd learned about his wife's death, his isolation, his desperate need for human connection. She'd chosen this specific position with a purpose. Emma's breath caught as she read the most recent entry, dated just weeks before Sarah collapsed. Emma doesn't realize her own worth. She's intelligent, capable, and stronger than she believes. If I can bring her here, perhaps she'll find the happiness that's always eluded her. James Carter needs someone who can match his strength with her own. I pray I've chosen correctly. Sarah had orchestrated everything. The job recommendation, the timing, even the inheritance revelation. She'd been playing matchmaker from her deathbed. Emma closed the diary with tears in her eyes. Sarah had given up her position, her health, her final months of strength to create this opportunity. That evening, a massive thunderstorm rolled across the plains. Emma had never seen lightning so fierce or heard thunder so violent. The ranch house shook on its foundations as wind howled around the corners. Emma huddled in Sarah's small room, trying to read by lamplight as rain hammered the windows. A particularly vicious gust extinguished her flame, plunging the room into darkness. She fumbled for matches but couldn't find any. Lightning illuminated the room in brief, terrifying flashes. The wooden walls creaked ominously. A soft knock interrupted her panic. "Emma?" James's voice carried through the door. "Are you all right?" She opened the door to find him holding a lantern. His hair was damp from rain, his shirt clinging to his chest. "The storm woke me. I wanted to make sure you weren't frightened." Emma realized she was trembling, though whether from fear or his proximity, she couldn't tell. It's quite violent. James stepped into the room, setting his lantern on the small table. The worst I've seen in years, but the rain is exactly what we need. Another crack of thunder shook the house. Emma instinctively moved closer to James. Come downstairs, he said gently. The main hearth is more sheltered. In the parlor, James built up the fire while Emma sat on the sofa. The familiar domestic scene felt both natural and charged with tension. I owe you an apology, James said, settling into the chair across from her. For what? For letting Tom's suspicions affect how I treat you. You've done nothing but improve this ranch since you arrived. Emma watched firelight dance across his features. You were protecting your interests. That's understandable. No, it wasn't. James leaned forward. I was protecting myself from caring too much. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither dared cross. Thunder crashed overhead. Emma flinched involuntarily. Without thinking, James moved to the sofa beside her. You're safe here. His arms settled around her shoulders. Emma felt herself relax against his solid warmth. The storm continued its assault, but inside the circle of James's protection, fear transformed into something entirely different. Emma's eyes grew heavy as exhaustion claimed her. James's heartbeat provided a steady rhythm beneath the chaos outside. She fell asleep listening to rain that might save everything. Emma woke to find herself covered by James's wool blanket, alone on the parlor sofa. Weak morning light filtered through the windows. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and cool. She found James in the kitchen, already dressed for work. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw. He looked up when she entered, something soft in his expression that hadn't been there in weeks. Sleep well? Better than I have in days. Emma smoothed her wrinkled dress self-consciously. The rain helped. We got nearly 2 inches. James poured coffee into 2 cups. Might be enough to save the cattle if we're careful. He handed her a cup, their fingers brushing briefly. Emma felt heat that had nothing to do with the coffee. James, about last night. We don't need to discuss it, he said quietly. Unless you want to. Emma studied his face. The walls he'd built around himself had cracks in them now. A week later, devastating news arrived. The bank in town sent an official notice. James had 3 weeks to pay his outstanding loan or face foreclosure on the entire ranch. Emma found him staring at the document in his study, his face pale with shock. How much do you owe? $2,500. His voice sounded hollow. Might as well be $25,000. Emma's inheritance could cover that amount easily with money left over. She opened her mouth to offer help, then closed it again. James would never accept charity from a kitchen worker. The offer would only raise more questions about her mysterious resources. There has to be another solution. James crumpled the notice in his fist. I've considered everything. Selling cattle won't bring enough. The land is my only real asset, and losing it defeats the purpose. Over the following days, Emma watched James age before her eyes. He barely ate. His shoulders carried impossible weight. She wanted desperately to help, but couldn't find a way that wouldn't expose her secret. Tom Becker, meanwhile, grew increasingly hostile. He questioned Emma's every action, monitored her movements, and made pointed comments about people who pretended to be something they weren't. Strange how the new girl always has money for expensive ingredients, he said loudly during dinner service. Maybe she's just good at bargaining, Daisy replied defensively. Or maybe she's got resources she's not mentioning. Emma felt Tom's suspicious eyes on her constantly. He was building toward something, gathering evidence for an accusation she couldn't defend without revealing everything. The confrontation came during the monthly ranch gathering. All the hands assembled in the main barn for their pay, and James's announcements about upcoming work. Emma served coffee and sandwiches, trying to stay invisible. Tom stood up during the meeting, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. Before we talk about next month's work, maybe we should discuss who's really running this ranch. James frowned. What are you talking about? Your precious kitchen girl. The one who's got you so twisted around you can't see straight. Emma's blood turned to ice, every eye in the barn fixed on her. That's enough, Tom, James warned. Is it? Because I've been doing some checking. Tom pulled a crumpled bank receipt from his pocket. Found this in town. Emma Thompson made a deposit for $300 last week. Mighty strange for someone earning kitchen wages. Gasps rippled through the assembled workers. Emma felt the world tilt sideways. Where did a kitchen girl get that kind of money? Tom demanded. Unless she's been stealing from the ranch accounts. I never stole anything, Emma said quietly. Then where did it come from? James stepped between them. You're out of line, Tom. Am I? Or are you just too blind to see what's happening under your nose? Tom's voice rose to a shout. She's been playing you from the start. Rich girl slumming with the working folk, having a laugh at our expense. You don't know what you're talking about. Tom laughed bitterly. Don't I? Ask her about the inheritance. Ask her about the lawyer's letters from Denver. Ask her why she's really here. The barn fell silent except for the sound of Emma's hammering heart. Tom had been watching her more carefully than she'd realized. James turned to face her slowly. Is it true? Emma met his gaze steadily. Yes. The single word hit like a gunshot. James's expression went completely blank. How much? $3,000, and property in Denver. Someone whispered a prayer. That amount represented more money than most of them would see in their lifetimes. So why are you here? James's voice was dangerously quiet. Emma glanced around the barn at all the staring faces. Because I chose to be. You chose to lie to everyone, to pretend you needed this job. I never lied about needing anything, just not money. Tom stepped forward triumphantly. See, I told you she was playing games with us. But his victory celebration was cut short when James whirled on him with fury. And what about you, Tom? Want to explain the missing grain receipts from last month? The cattle sales that never made it into the books? Tom's face went white. I don't know what you mean. I mean, you've been skimming ranch profits for months, planning to blame any discrepancies on Emma when the books didn't balance. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Tom backed toward the barn door. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can. James pulled out a ledger. Emma helped me organize the accounts properly. Every missing dollar is documented. Tom's careful plans crumbled in an instant. He'd exposed Emma's secret but revealed his own crimes in the process. This isn't over, he snarled, then fled into the night. Emma stood alone in the center of the barn, surrounded by shocked faces and broken trust. James looked at her one final time. We need to talk. The ranch hands dispersed in uncomfortable silence, leaving Emma and James alone in the barn. Lantern light cast long shadows between them. Emma had never felt more exposed or vulnerable. James leaned against a hay bale, studying her with unreadable eyes. $3,000. Yes. From your father. Emma nodded. Charles Whitmore, a Denver businessman who couldn't publicly acknowledge his mixed-race daughters. But he provided for you after death. Sarah knew about the inheritance before she got sick. She chose this job specifically. Emma pulled Sarah's diary from her apron pocket. She was matchmaking from her deathbed. James took the diary, reading several pages in silence. His expression shifted as he absorbed Sarah's careful plans and observations. She orchestrated all of this. She believed we would be good for each other. Emma's voice caught. She died thinking she'd given me a chance at happiness. James closed the diary carefully. Why didn't you tell me? Because you needed someone who chose to be here, not someone with nowhere else to go. Emma met his gaze steadily. I stayed because I wanted to, not because I had to. You could have lived comfortably in Denver. Comfortable isn't the same as happy. James moved closer. What would make you happy? Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. You, this ranch, a life we build together. Even knowing I might lose everything in 3 weeks? Especially then. James reached out, touching her face with gentle fingers. I was so angry about the deception. but mostly I was terrified. Of what? That you'd leave when you got tired of playing poor. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Rich girls don't usually choose kitchen work. I'm not playing anything. This is who I choose to be. James studied her face in the lamplight. Tom was right about one thing. I have been twisted around since you arrived. Is that bad? Probably. James smiled for the first time in days. I've been in love with you since you reorganized my bookkeeping. Emma laughed, despite her tears. That's very romantic. I'm not good with pretty words, but I know what I feel. James pulled her closer. The inheritance could save the ranch. I know. I can't take your money. It wouldn't be charity. It would be an investment in our future. James hesitated. I have nothing to offer you that compares to what you already have. You have everything I want. Emma placed her hand over his heart. A home, a purpose, someone who sees my worth beyond what I inherited. The ranch hands will talk. Let them. They'll adjust. James looked toward the barn doors where Tom had fled. What about him? The territorial marshal is already investigating missing ranch funds. Tom won't be bothering anyone much longer. They stood in comfortable silence, the weight of secrets finally lifted between them. There's something else, Emma said softly. I visited Sarah yesterday. She's very weak. James's expression grew tender. She gave up everything to bring you here. She did, and I want to honor that gift. The next morning, Emma rode into town with James to visit the bank. She transferred enough money to satisfy the loan and provide operating capital for the next year. The banker's eyebrows rose when he saw the Denver bank drafts, but he processed the transaction without questions. Walking back to their horses, James stopped suddenly. Marry me. Emma turned with surprise. What? Marry me. Today. Before we lose our nerve or Tom comes back with more trouble. That's not very romantic either. James knelt in the dusty street, taking her hands in both of his. Emma Thompson, you're the strongest, most stubborn, most surprising woman I've ever met. You saved my ranch, organized my life, and turned my kitchen into something magical. I love your sharp mind and your gentle heart and the way you make everything better just by being there. Emma felt tears spring to her eyes. James, I don't have a ring or fancy words or anything to offer except a life of hard work and cattle and more Montana winters than you can imagine. But if you'll have me, I promise to spend every day proving worthy of the choice you made. Yes. The word came out as barely a whisper. James rose and kissed her there in the middle of Main Street, with half the town watching from storefront windows. They found the circuit preacher at the church and were married within the hour. Daisy and several ranch hands served as witnesses. Emma wore her simple blue dress, James his cleanest work clothes. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Emma felt pieces of herself that had been scattered finally coming together. That evening, they returned to Sarah's bedside. Emma's sister was barely conscious, but she smiled when she saw their joined hands. You found each other, Sarah whispered. Thanks to you, Emma replied. Sarah squeezed Emma's fingers, weakly. Be happy. She died peacefully 2 days later, with Emma and James both holding her hands. They buried Sarah under the old oak tree beside the ranch house. The entire community attended the service. Even former skeptics acknowledged that Sarah Thompson had been a woman of uncommon wisdom and love. 1 year later, Emma stood in her garden, one hand pressed to her growing belly, watching James work with the cattle in the near pasture. The ranch prospered under their combined management. Emma's business acumen paired perfectly with James's practical experience. A letter arrived from Denver, announcing the discovery of more Whitmore relatives and additional inheritance opportunities. Emma set it aside without opening it. She had everything she needed right here. A husband who cherished her mind as much as her heart. A home built on mutual respect and shared dreams. The promise of children who would grow up knowing their worth came from character, not circumstances. James looked up from his work and waved. Emma waved back, her heart full of gratitude for Sarah's final, perfect gift.